Welcome, friends. My name is Micah McCall-Nicholson, and I am your program assistant for Quaker Outreach here at FCNL. I'm so excited to be your tech host for this evening. This is our April Quaker Changemakers event, where we have two wonderful speakers that are returning with us. But before I pass it off to Alicia McBride to moderate that conversation, I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page about some tech things, since we are all on a virtual platform. So as I sent in the chat, say hello in the chat, share your name, your location, meeting or church if you attend, and if you know the ancestral land that you live on, that you are zooming in from. This is a way to build community virtually and a really important part of this work about Indigenous acknowledgement and rights. So again, we are so glad that you are here tonight joining us from all across the country. As you can see, we are recording this event so that folks who aren't able to come this evening can learn about and hear from the speakers that we have joining. The audience will not be included. As you can see, Alicia and myself currently, and our speakers in a minute will be pinned. Those are the only videos that will be on the recording. So feel free to turn off your video if you feel uncomfortable though with the recording happening. Another piece of useful information is that captioning is automatically available through Zoom. Thank you, Zoom. I know I love my live transcriptions. If you do not want to see the captions, though, you can click on the live transcript option on your Zoom toolbar and click hide subtitles. Or on the contrary, you can click show subtitles if they aren't, but they should be automatically on for you already. After Alicia and Buffy and Liseli get into their discussion, near the end of our program, we will have some time for you to ask questions towards the end. We will also be asking if you have any resources or your communities are doing any work on this topic to share that as well. And we will send that out on a resource document in the follow-up email. We will do our best during this question and answer time to address as many of the questions as possible, but to be honest, we only have an hour, so we might not get to all of them, but please submit your questions anyway, and we will share them with our speakers. Also, any considerations if you're zooming in on a phone, if during that time you want to raise your hand, that will be the one time that we might. Yes, so just send them in the chat. That is the easiest way to get questions apart, and we will be putting those to our speakers during that time. Please contact me if you are in need of any Zoom tech support during this. You can either private message me and I will respond very quickly, or you can email me at mnicholson@fcnl.org. I will send that in the chat so that everyone has it. But with that, I will pass it over to Alicia McBride to introduce this event and our wonderful speakers.
Greeting, friends. Thank you, Micah, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you are here for this conversation. My name is Alicia McBride. I'm FCNL's Senior Director for Quaker Leadership, and I'm really honored to be moderating this event and seeing all of the names coming through the chat of all of the friends near and far who are joining us. So just to give a brief overview of what the next hour or so will be, we will begin with some centering silence and settling to prepare us for this conversation. I'll give a little bit of an introduction, an overview, introduce our speakers, and then we'll be in conversation for a period of time and then have some opportunity, as Micah said, for your questions as well. Our official close is at 7:30 Eastern time. And Buffy and Liseli have generously offered to stay and have a little bit of conversation if they're friends that didn't get their question answered or want to connect afterwards. So if, once we officially close, we'll give more instruction on that. So that's the plan. And I invite you now to take a comfortable seat and settle into the space that you're in. And take a few moments of grounding and waiting and listening as we prepare for this conversation. Thank you, friends. Before we get started and I introduce Buffy and Liseli, I just want to say a few things about language and to highlight two phrases that you will hear as part of this event and in some of the conversation, particularly about the legislation that FCNL is lobbying on, which is called the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding Schools Policies Act. And the two words that you may have noticed in there, one is Indian, which is not a word that is preferred by many Indigenous people. And then the other is boarding school, which some friends and Indigenous people feel is soft pedaling what those institutions were like and what they were designed to do and the harm they caused. And I want to acknowledge those words will be part of this conversation when they need to be, because they have legal meaning in US law. The federal government actually still uses the words American Indian to refer to the indigenous people in the United States. The indigenous people of Alaska are referred to with the term Alaskan Native. And it speaks to the government's mindset and terminology that those are still part of our laws. And when the Interior Department reported in 2002 about the impact of boarding schools, it was the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative that they were reporting on. So there is tension and concern around the language that we use. And I also just wanted to give some explanation that sometimes that is why we continue to use words that may not be the preference or that may cause pain to some people. And I appreciate, and FCNL appreciates the ongoing conversation with all of you as we work for integrity in our words and in our actions on this issue. So with that, I am going to spotlight our speakers and introduce them. So for those friends, some of you who were at our Spring Lobby Weekend conference last month in Washington, we have the honor of welcoming back two of our speakers from the panel that we called Reckoning with Original Sins, Faith, Institutions, and Indian Boarding Schools. Buffy Curtis and Liseli Haines are life partners and members of Mohawk Valley Friends Meeting, New York Yearly Meeting. They began their collaboration nearly 20 years ago. Their mutual call to navigate the waterways led them to help organize and paddle in the two-row wampum renewal campaign of 2013 from Albany to Manhattan. And this experience was the beginning of their ally work with Native Americans, specifically the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Threading their way through the maze of white privilege, decolonization, and manifest destiny, they discovered a passion for leading workshops on the doctrine of discovery, mostly to settler Americans. Their 6-year tenure as co-clerks of the Indigenous Affairs Committee of their yearly meeting brought many opportunities to continue this work directly with friends nationwide. Their current participation with Quaker Indian Boarding Schools Research Group is bringing forth new information and important historical data regarding Quakers' actions and deep involvement in the boarding school policies. Carrying forth this knowledge, the work of apology and reparations are also part of this ongoing work. And you'll see on your screen right now a picture of that panel that we mentioned at Spring Lobby Weekend. During that panel, they spoke about the role of Quakers in supporting and operating these institutions in the 19th and 20th centuries. And the other speakers on the right of your screen are the Reverend Bradley Houff and Vance Blackfoot, who are doing this work with the Episcopal Church and the Evangelical Lutheran Church. And one of the things that's really interesting about the differences in this work between faith denominations is, unlike those denominations that are more hierarchical, Quakers' participation in this reckoning, atonement, and healing is bottom up and not top down. Each of us individually and in our communities have the responsibility to step into and own the harm we have and will contribute to. And it was really meaningful and powerful the way Buffy and Liseli spoke about that responsibility, leading several of the Indigenous participants in the Spring Lobby Weekend event to talk to us about the importance of elevating these kinds of stories. So this event tonight focuses on how settler colonial people in this country can be allies to Indigenous people who are seeking truth and healing. These are really important conversations, and it is not a substitute, obviously, from hearing directly from the Indigenous people who are leading these efforts and who are still experiencing the effects of centuries of government and church-sponsored forced assimilation and cultural genocide. So we do want to also start with a little bit of that direct experience from one of the other panels that we had at Spring Lobby Weekend. We're going to share a short clip of Teresa Sheldon speaking. Teresa is the Policy and Advocacy Director for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition and a citizen of the Tulalip Tribes. In this, she's talking about the impact of boarding schools and why the quest for truth is so important.
Really, when we talk about intergenerational trauma, I'm going to show you why I'm wearing it. And so in my skirt, I literally have 4 generations. In the orange is my great grandmother, Teresa, and she went to the Tulalip boarding school. And in the black is my grandma, Nola, who attended the boarding school. And in the purple is my mother. And then in the blue is me, right? 4 generations of that. My mother was sexually abused at the age of 6 years old from boarding school attendee, a boarding school survivor. We call them survivors. Her life was actually formulated around the trauma of childhood abuse. And her life, when she passed away, on her death certificate, it says she died of liver failure. I know that's trauma. She actually died of the trauma of her childhood that she didn't get through, right? I'm a result of the 4 generations of trauma. I literally am wearing it every day, right? As a Native person, I can choose to not wear it visibly, but it's always here with me. Like, I cannot talk about it and I can disassociate it and disregard it, but it's going to show up in my work. It's going to show up in my parenting. And it's going to show up in how I present myself to you and to other people. That intergenerational trauma isn't a choice. And that's the harshness of it for Native people, is it's not a choice. We're not able to pick which family we're born into and who started the work and who started breaking down the trauma and who started going to therapy and who started addressing it, right? And so when we talk about intergenerational trauma, it's super easy to blame, judge, and say, oh, that was so long ago. For us, it's today. I think it's March 20th, 2024. And it's today for us. And that's what we carry, right? And that's the work we're doing. And so it's understanding that and understanding the impacts. And we understand that Native Americans were omitted from the United States in our history. We're omitted from the United States in our curriculum. And we're omitted in so much of the truth. Yet the foundation of this country was created from our genocide and from the atrocities of our people. And so when we're here to advocate for legislation and we're here to advocate for truth, that is the healing of intergenerational trauma, right? Because to get healing, you have to say the truth. And we have yet to tell the truth.
Let's just take a moment to hold those words and the courage that Teresa had in sharing them. We thought it was important to start with that, to really consider what those of us who do not have Indigenous background and ancestry are doing and trying to do when we work in this area and come to terms with the way that we have been part of this trauma. And so starting our conversation, Buffy and Liseli, because I know you have a lot to say on that topic. You know, it was so wonderful to have you with us at that event at Spring Lobby Weekend. For people who don't know, this is a event where we brought 350 young advocates to Washington. We had Quakers, people who are attending Quaker schools, organizers, Indigenous students, Native Alaskan advocates, a whole range of people who are lobbying on this legislation to establish a Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding schools. And as of now, we know of at least 7 new co-sponsors to that legislation that came directly as a result of that lobbying. So it really has had an impact. And I wanted to start by asking you, you know, what was that experience like for you to be at that event? And especially thinking about the importance of young adult advocacy on these issues and in this movement.
Hi, this is Liseli, and it was very special to be at that event. And what it brought back for me was that I didn't learn a lot of this history until I was in my 50s. And it was really important to know that there were so many young adults who were hearing this history now, 30 years maybe before I did, and they have that many more years to work on the issues, to figure out how to live their lives with integrity.
I'm Buffy, and I go where she goes, and she goes where I go, and here we are. We're really thrilled to be invited back. I would like to give homage to the video clip. The power of those words and the presence of folks to be able to carry this message to us is what keeps us going in the work that we currently find ourselves called to. And being able to be invited into FCNL's lobby weekend as panelists was kind of like, oh my, okay, I guess this is what we're doing now. And as nerve-wracking as it is, it's so affirming for us to continue to do this work. And now being invited back, the idea that that FCNL understands the principle and the practices of hands-on experience, of calling people together, especially the young adults, and calling people to this personal work and teaching them the means and practices that they need to do. But the education that went on throughout that weekend, it made me really jealous that I wasn't invited to come for the whole weekend and only panel. But I would like to say the fact that people came from so far away, the Alaskan folks that came, and we were able to talk with them afterwards, and they just said, we're so glad there's a Quaker here that understands what we're trying to do. You know, so all of those, just in that short period of time that we were there, it was so affirming of the timing and the power of this work together.
Thank you. So you mentioned sort of starting on this work in your 50s, Liseli. I would love for both of you to share sort of how you came to this work and where your journey started.
Well, I would say that I grew up in the Hudson Valley and on the land of the Ramapo of the Lenape. That is not how they were known when I was growing up, and I had very little awareness of Indigenous people in that area. And it wasn't until about the winter of 2011, 2012, that it was suggested that we get involved in the Neighbors of the Onondaga, which is an ally organization about 35 years old. It's been around quite a while, has a lot of experience working with the Onondaga, and is very well respected. But it was suggested that we get involved in the Two-Row Wampum Renewal Campaign. This is a commemoration of the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which was in about 1613, the very first treaty between the Europeans and the Haudenosaunee. It was with the Dutch as they came up the Hudson River. And the native people said, well, these people are back again. They're not going to go away. So we need to make a treaty with them. And they created a wampum belt that is a field of white with 2 rows of purple. And 1 row of purple is the indigenous people, the Haudenosaunee or other indigenous people. The other row is the Europeans. And they were traveling down the river of life side by side together, not stepping out of their boat or canoe, not crossing that water in between, but keeping their own laws, their own customs, their own languages, their own cultures. And we did a symbolic enactment. It was never done before, so it was not a reenactment. It was just a symbolic enactment of traveling down the Hudson River in 2 rows, side by side. There were between 500 and 600 people, about half indigenous and half ally. And it took us 12 days to go from Albany to Manhattan. And we camped along the way. We had talking circles. We ate together. We laughed together. We camped out together. We got to know each other. And I think that was really important place to start. And that the 2 rows signify to me that ally relationship. We are side by side, but we don't tell anyone what to do. And as a matter of fact, we would wait for the indigenous people to lead, wait for them to say what they need. We listen, and then we can help out what they ask us to do, not assuming that we know, which is historically been an issue.
So out of that, it was a remarkable experience, and it was a foundation that sort of happened to us by happenstance when we were having a surprise dinner party with Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she said, I know where you guys need to go, because we had always talked about whether or not we'd do something on the waterways. And what I was not prepared for was the level of life-changing experience it would be, and also an education changing, because the basis of the work that went on in relationship to understanding our historical relationship with the indigenous peoples of all lands all over the world are the papal bulls known as the Doctrine of Christian Discovery. And there was a series of papal bulls, which some folks hopefully will be familiar with. Others we discover don't know anything about it, because it is actually the basis and the foundation upon which most of the lands were conquered and, quote, found. And what they found there was considered to be what's known as terra nullius, empty lands. So no matter what they found, if there were great communities and great cities and thousands of people, millions of people in this landscape, the people that settled those lands, that conquered those lands, were told that those people were not people, and that until they were Christianized, they were converted and missionized, that they were to be treated terribly. I mean, just completely conquered. And so when I learned that, and I learned that principle, the principle of the Doctrine of Christian Discovery, currently sits in our federal government as a basis of our government, which they never talk about that, but this is it, that this is conquered land, and therefore it is the conqueror's land. So anybody that was here before, they're not here, and they're still not here. So what we're hearing and what we're doing in the work that we're currently doing is calling back from that pit of you don't belong, you're not alive, you're not real, you're certainly not human, that we're calling that back in this work. And the indigenous people of this country, you know, NABS, the boarding school group that are working, they're indigenous. Deb Holland, the only reason that this is happening now is because Biden was good enough and wise enough to put Deb Haaland as the Department of the Interior. So this work is calling back the negative and lifting up the reality of the humanity of all the people that were here before. And it's our job to, one, learn about why we're here, why we as colonizers are here, and begin that process of work together, which is essential, and base it in the principles of the Two-Row Wampum.
Yes, I know. As we were preparing for this conversation, we were talking about some of the challenges, you know, Buffy, of how deep this goes into our country, our laws, our culture, as the conquerors who wound up here. And it called to mind to me the metaphor, a gardening metaphor of like, you can, you know, if you're pulling out a weed, you can pull the weed, but if you leave the roots, the weed is just going to come back. And so I think some of what the work that you all are doing, and that I know that the Toward Right Relationship with Native People, with Friends Peace Teams is doing, with Paula Palmer and Geraldine Dakota, is trying to get at that root and try to help us understand what we need to pull out for real change to happen. And I think it's especially at FCNL, you know, attention that we talk about a lot and try to think about, because we are an organization that is working within the system of US government and with Congress, which, you know, is some of the weediest weeds when it comes to these kinds of issues. And just, you know, as we discussed, or as I mentioned earlier, that just the language that's ingrained in law, and it's the same language that's been used since the revolution to talk about the people that are that were here before this country. And so I think you're both really pointing to that, the importance of that examination, and then the importance of relationship with the people that are still here and part of this work as well.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah,
real
please
quick?
go.
There was a
Go ahead.
piece of that I didn't continue on with, which is the fact that the indigenous peoples of this country have been doing this work forever and ever. And one of the examples that we have of work that's being done with a relatively positive outcome is the work that was done by many folks, but a lot of the Haudenosaunee peoples kept making trips, both themselves, the chiefs, and many trips with the youth to the Vatican to lobby for the idea that, you know, listen, you guys, you started this, you said this was okay. And you know now, if you're going to preach the gospel, that it's not okay. And they kept at it for years and years and years. And then, as some of us know, or anybody that's paid attention, is that the Pope finally has renounced the doctrines of Christian discovery, with the caveat that that's not our teachings. So there's continuing conversation that has to go on that says, not only do you renounce it, but you are willing to work for the repair of the damages that have gone on, and be willing to speak to the fact that this is so tightly woven into international law. The reasons that we don't move forward in some places in international law is because we have that doctrine of discovery just bound into the law and our thinking. So I hope that's a little glimmer. It's one of the many glimmers.
Thank you. I just saw the question that came up. Do you know when that renouncement happened?
I knew I was supposed to have a date. It's less than a year.
Okay, so very recently.
I think it was
someone added 2023. So
there you go. Oh, no, it's brand new.
Yeah,
it's brand shiny new.
Yeah, we know there's a lot of wisdom in this space. Not just the people who are pinned to the.
Yes, please.
So I wanted to ask you both about, how this work connects to your understanding and practice as Quakers. And I will see who wants to go first.
You want to go first? No. Okay. I guess it's come to me. It's shaken my world as a friend. I think I can't say it any simpler than that, because when I first came among friends, I also knew friends as those, those Nobel Prize winning folks who do all kinds of good things. And then as time went along, and thanks to Paula Palmer's research, we began to understand that Quakers had a role in something that was terrible. No matter the intent, I believe, was not intended to be terrible, but they didn't understand fully what it meant to separate children and educate them and have it be the policy of assimilation. And a piece of that for me was learning how to step back. I was raised as a white person who knew all the answers, and we could just, if you just get out of the way, we'll take care of business. And I have had to learn often the hard way when working with Indigenous peoples, what it means to shut my mouth and take a step back. And I'll cite just a quick example of, what one would call outrunning your guide. But anyway, I was all excited about the idea that New York Yearly Meeting could finally understand what it means to do an apology. So I had it all figured out, and I was all ready to rip and roar and get it going and get the policy, approved by the yearly meeting. And then we would take it around to all the Haudenosaunee people and say, here, we're bringing this to you, and we want you to know that we're sorry. So that's my enthusiastic self. And then my newly taught self said, well, you better run this by an Indigenous person first, because my natural thing would be to do it myself. So I gave, we have a dear friend who we have learned through this process, who is the clan mother of one of the nations. And so I called her and I said, do you have time to listen? Because I'm really excited about something and I really want your feedback about this. And she said, I think so. Yeah, okay. In very quiet, listening way. And I blasted out my grand ideas and wouldn't this be great? And what do you think? And there was dead silence on the end of the phone. And I was like, oh no, I blew this one. And she said, well, I think that's all fine and good. And yeah, we would probably listen to you when you came, and we would, we hear lots of words. What we're looking for, in all honesty, is what you do with those words. So we're looking at your actions, we're not looking at your words. And what we really need you to do is to take advantage of what you can do, which is knock on the doors that we can't get to. Knock on those doors, get them opened, and then stand the hell out of the way so we can walk in. And I tell that story and I get chills thinking about it, because that's exactly what we need to do. We need to learn to keep our mouths shut, learn to follow what they have to say, and knock on the doors and get the hell out of the way so they can walk through.
And it reminds me of something that happened when we were at Standing Rock. We went to the orientation when we first got there, and the orientation was mostly for settler colonial descendants, settler descendants. And they said, while you're here, listen and watch. Don't ask questions. Just listen and watch, and you will understand what you need to do or what is the right thing to do. And it makes me think of the Quakers listening to that still small voice of God and watching what is going on in the world around us and then learning from that. So the discernment, but it's very complex. Even discernment is complex. We know that we, as Quakers, have made mistakes in the past, and we have to figure out how not to make mistakes in the future.
And that's why the Truth and Healing Commission is so incredibly valuable and so incredibly important, because it is literally opening the doors so that they can walk through, and now they can begin this process of healing and truth telling. And the idea of the truth telling, and what we say when we do the workshop, is that nobody on the screen and nobody currently had a real hand in anything that was done. We're the descendants of that. And the Native people talk about the difference between how white people or non-Native people act. And that is that they come in with the idea of what is their right. The Native indigenous peoples basically come in with the idea of, what am I responsible for? And it's time that we begin the process of adjusting our thinking from rights to responsibilities.
Thank you. There's so many places we could go, and I wish we had so much more time to get into all of them. I know that many people on this call are sharing resources and are very active in lots of different ways in this work. And there may be people on this call who are, where you were and learning about this and trying to figure it out. Where do they start, what their role is? What advice would you give, or what sort of direction would you suggest for people that really want to commit to doing this work?
This work is so large, it can be overwhelming. But because it's so large, there are many entry points. There are many places that people can come in and get involved. I want to just mention a little bit about intent and impact. We know that the Native and the indigenous boarding schools were part of the peace policy of President Grant, which was very strongly supported by Quakers. And it was called the peace policy. Quakers like that because of our testimony for peace. And it would help stop some of the Indian wars, would still help stop the killing. But the peace policy itself was, the impact of it was to basically incarcerate indigenous people on reservations, incarcerate children at these assimilation institutions that were called boarding schools, and destroy a culture, many cultures, many languages, many families, and create ongoing trauma. So we really have to be careful about intent and really look at what the impact will be with open eyes, because none of these situations are easy. They are all very complex. Yes, it's good not to be killing people, but the results of stopping that are not always known. So I think that Quakers have believed that they were doing the right thing. But again, without the listening to what indigenous people have to say, listening to what indigenous people want or need, and that's not for us to say what is wanted or what is needed. That is for the indigenous people to say. It's something that comes up very often in Noon, in the Neighbors of the Onondaga Nation. We talk about whether what we have to decide about is our row, or is that the row, this is a 2-row wampum, is that the row that the Onondaga people are walking. And if it's their row, we're hands off. They have to make a decision. And if it's our row, we get to do something about it. And then there are the places where you have to figure out whose row is whose. But I highly recommend that if people can find an ally organization with a respected history, that is a great way to start. And again, we have to be very careful looking, because we don't want our descendants to look back and say, what were they thinking? The way we say that about our ancestors.
There is this awareness, how friends can get involved. In New York, we're slowly and carefully bringing forward things that meetings and individual Quakers can do. And it starts with where are your feet? What land are you standing on? You might think it's yours, but there was somebody there long before you, or it may be somebody's hunting ground. It doesn't matter. What it matters is that on the very basis of everything is whose land are you on? And our process here in the yearly meeting has been first to develop a sense of priority of an apology. So we started with an apology, and now we're working on calling out meetings and individuals and the acknowledgement. Sorry, we do an acknowledgement first, and that was our first step. We'll get to the apology eventually, but we have to understand who and what are we apologizing for. And a lot of people don't even have that sense. We're getting there, slow but sure. But the piece about right now, we're working on asking meetings, all of our meetings in the yearly meeting, to be willing to undertake whose land the meeting house is on, and where did the money come from? Not only was it the land taking, but it's the financial commitment, both to that land and whether or not their meetings were involved in any way with the boarding schools. And the QUIBS, the Quaker Indigenous Boarding School Research Group, is coming up with some amazing information. And so we're sort of asking each meeting to have someone who might be willing to begin that process of really understanding, whose land are you on? And then what are you going to do about it?
And some of the things that you can start, there are, as I said, many different entry points, whether it's supporting a language program, an Indigenous language program. There are many of those now, and they're very important because the languages are in peril at this point, with so many of the elders dying. Or you could pay rent. There's a lot of programs I know in Oregon. There may be some closer where people are actually paying rent to the original peoples of the land. And it's a voluntary rent. They choose how much they can give and give it to the organization supported by that tribe or nation. You can give land. I had the opportunity to do that. But knowing whose land you're on is a really good step, and looking for an ally organization and listening and watching and learning before you take the next step, because this is a long-term project, and it's full of relationships that are a total joy. They can be difficult, and you learn a lot, and you make mistakes, and everybody is going to make mistakes, but we learn from our mistakes, and we just say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and we go on from there.
Thank you. I also want to lift up, in addition to the work that you all are doing, I just want to lift up the work that Alaska Friends Conference is doing as well. And I will just put in the chat one article about the most recent activity where they have, starting with the apology, in conversation with Alaska Natives, and then just this a few months ago, they offered monetary support for a regional cultural healing center. And I particularly, the quote from the member of the Tlingit tribe that they worked with at the end said that their apology was well received, but it's only the beginning of a long road ahead. They acknowledged the wrongdoings of the church and acknowledged things that happened and shouldn't have happened, but this money by no means lets the Quakers off the hook. This is a good start to healing, and I think that's a good, it's also, we're not doing this for other people to think that we're good people. Like, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. I want to turn to some questions from all of you who are here. If you have some, please put them in the chat. I will start with one about, if people are interested in the Quaker Indigenous Schools Research Group and getting more involved in that side of things, how do they find out more? Oh, I see that Paula is answering that question right now.
Great.
Yeah, if you've got Paula on, just ask her.
Yes.
I do have to say here, this is a perfect opportunity because there are incredible people out there, who I can't see, which I'm really grateful for, because I'd be even more nervous. But I do want to acknowledge that sitting here, I am humbled by the opportunity to share the little bit that I think we know, and that this community that's currently on this screen is remarkable. And it gives us great hope for the work that we've been called to do, because we have been called to do it, and we've been called to do it by the Department of the Interior. We've been called to do it as a faith organization. And you brought up earlier that the idea that we are a diffuse, we're from the bottom up organization, is working in some ways to our detriment, because it makes it harder to sort of, it's like cats in a room full of rocking chairs. Who can you get? Who can you call to do the work? And I think, given this audience, we're calling everyone to begin this work.
And it was actually the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition that called the denominations who ran Indigenous boarding schools to research, to find the records on the schools, on the students, on the cemeteries. And that's what the Quaker Indigenous Boarding School Research Group is doing for Quakers. There are over 30 Quaker boarding schools in the United States, and there are many ways. I'm sure that Paula has put in the chat who to contact. So we have a wonderful group. We actually meet once a week just to do updates, and I can research on our own to our heart's content. And it's getting easier all the time, with a lot of work being done by Andrew Grant at Haverford and Swarthmore and his team, digitizing the records from their archives.
So there's a place for everyone in this work, whether you like talking to people or talking to documents.
Yes.
And everything in between. I see one question from the chat of someone that knows that their family was involved in one of the boarding schools, and wondering what to do with that information, how to sort of, who to reach out to about what they might do as a result of that knowledge.
That would be a really interesting thing for the research working group to have that information, because we don't have all the records, and anything we can get from people who know they have ancestors who worked in the schools or participated in any way, either financially or with work or as students. I think that's really important information that can be passed on to the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition.
Great.
I'd also like to very quickly just lift up the work that New England Yearly Meeting is doing. They've been incredibly involved in this work for almost a decade. In fact, the state of Maine, with the help of friends, have put out an entire program about the work that was done regarding the adoption issue among the Native folks up there. So
And foster care.
and the other piece is, if you're coming up with stuff, check out the areas that you come from. You know, was this in Ohio? Was it in Texas? Was it in Alaska? And check in with folks, especially if it's friends, check in with the Quakers in that area. Because the more the Quaker meetings, the yearly meetings, begin to get this information, the more work that will draw people in.
There was a question about the language work in particular, and what kind, work to record languages, or sort of who to reach out to on that particular issue. Do you have any?
I know most about what's in New York State, the language program at Akwesasne with the Mohawk language, and in Nakina with the Abenaki language. Onondaga has an Onondaga school. I'm hoping that people who are on this call can put, if they know of language schools that could use funding, and that's mostly what it is, funding to help elders teach children the language that is part of the culture, and many parts of the culture can't be translated into English, so that if it's only in English, it will be lost. So hopefully anyone out there on this call who knows of local schools, language schools, please put that in the chat.
Well, there's lots of really good information being shared, and I
Oh,
can't read
that's
all of
great.
it. Yes,
Oh,
we
that's
will
great.
definitely collect these links and information and share them out with you when you are when we send out the recording for this call. And I think all of us will learn a lot from this gathered group. I don't see any other questions right now, but I wonder what what are you most excited to talk about that I haven't asked you about yet?
Oh, that's no fair. We had to practice all this before we got it. No, that's actually a really perfect question. And I'm going to let her lead.
I think that one of the things that was most exciting to me was having the ability to pass on my mother's land to a Native organization, to the Oneida, the traditional Oneida women. And as in many indigenous nations or tribes, they're called nations here in New York because they are sovereign nations. Many places call them tribes. The Oneida are very complicated. It's a complicated structure of government between a traditional government and an elected government and a sort of self-proclaimed government. And I didn't know how to navigate those differences, but we're definitely on Oneida homeland here in upstate New York. And I was talking to people and getting ideas and getting a lot of input from Native people when I would bring this up and say, well, what do I do? And one person actually took it to the Grand Council at Onondaga, which is the council for all of the Haudenosaunee, and asked if they would have a Haudenosaunee land trust that land could be put in. That has not come to pass yet, as far as I know. But I began to build a relationship with an Oneida woman, a traditional Oneida woman. And we had long conversations over food. I met her mother and her friend's mother, who were faith keepers and clan mothers. And I ended up giving that land to the organization that's called We Work Together, which in Oneida is Agwegu Ashkane Yugwayot. And it's been really good for my heart. It has felt very good to have this land in the, well, it's not in the hands, under the care of the traditional Oneida women. And that's the Oneidas from New York, Ontario, and Wisconsin.
I think I'm excited and looking forward to the continuing conversation about this and being able to be part of lifting up Quakers' real purpose, which is to be bringing peace and reconciliation where our feet are trod, and be able to repair and restore our testimonies in good faith action. I just love being able to learn more and more. And anytime you step into this particular work, you're going to learn a lot if you're willing to listen. And I'm grateful for what I consider to be the teacup of information that I hold, and to be able to carry it in a greater vessel that friends are capable of, is really, I think it's really powerful, and it's incredibly humbling. And it's some of the most beautiful work I've ever done in my life. And I know in my heart now what it means to be called to the work. And we're still called to it. So we're here if you want to talk and we want to learn. So I'm so grateful to everybody that came to this call tonight. I'm blown away. I'm looking at a number down there going, I was told not to look at numbers before we started, but now I'm looking down there and going, oh my God, this is fabulous. So thank you everybody for this. We're grateful to be here.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I know there were some other questions that got posted and that we missed scrolling through. So I want to honor the time that you all have committed to being here, and do a little bit of summing up and closing. And then, as we said, Buffy and Liseli have offered to stay on, and we'll put you all in a breakout room so that you can have some more conversation if that is something you're looking for. I don't even know how to how to summarize where we have been, other than we're all doing this work, and we all have a role, and we do the work in relationship with each other and with those who have gone before and those who will come after, and leaning into our value and our practice as Quakers of really listening to where we are being led, and seeing when, as you all were saying, the sort of way we've been socialized as settler colonialist, descendants gets in the way of that, and coming back to that practice. And you all have highlighted so many ways that we can be involved in this work. I just want to mention a couple things going on with FCNL in particular. So members of Congress some of them are back in their districts. I think they shortened their recess a little bit, but continuing to contact your member of Congress and visit and drop by in support of the creation of the Truth and Healing Commission is something that is really important. And as I said, we have some momentum coming out of Spring Lobby Weekend. And educating yourself, reaching out to local Indigenous communities and learning what they would like you to do. Thank you so much, Buffy and Liseli, for being here again and for continuing this conversation. Thanks to all of you who have been part of this and shared your wisdom and knowledge, and called us in as an organization and as people when we're not doing everything we could be doing, as well as being in community with us. I'm going to turn this back to Micah for a few final steps, and then we'll let you all know if you want to stick around, sort of how that's going to work.
Hello again, friends. So it again was wonderful being a part of this conversation with you all, to hear the wisdom and love flowing through and spirit flowing through this space. So before we conclude the event, it is 7:31, but just to reassure everyone, I have been diligently collecting all of the resources that have been shared throughout the event, and they will be going out in the follow-up email with some editing to give a little bit of context about which piece of information they relate to. As I have sent in the chat, please write your member of Congress to support the Truth and Healing Commission. FCNL has a great resource where you can write emails using our format, but edit it as much as you want. I've also put in the chat our legislative ask, which you can send to your legislative representative or senator. And yes, so regarding Buffy and Liseli, who have graciously, with all my love, offered to stay around for friends who need more time to process this really deep and spirit-led work. I will be creating a breakout room that any folks who want to stay around for a little bit will be able to join. Buffy and Liseli will go to that room as I open it. But friends, thank you again for joining us for this April Quaker Changemakers event, and we hope to see you for the next one.